It was an evening like any other. I was in my home office, finishing up some work. Lisa, my wife, had gone out with her friends for the evening. It wasn't unusual. She'd been spending more time with them lately, and I didn't think much of it. We'd been married for 5 years, and I trusted her completely. But then, my phone buzzed and everything changed. Her name popped up on my screen, Lisa. It was a call, but I hadn't called her. Confused, I picked up, thinking she might have pocket-dialed me. I was about to hang up, but then I heard her voice on the other end, clear as day. At first, I thought she was talking to me. I said, "Hello, Lisa?" But she didn't respond. That's when I realized she was talking to someone else. Her words stopped me cold. She was laughing, talking to her friends, and what she was saying, it felt like a dagger to my chest. "I can't stand him," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Everything about him annoys me. The way he talks, the way he eats, it's all so pathetic." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, trying to convince myself that I'd misheard. But then she said it again, laughing even louder this time. "I hate him." Those words hit me like a freight train. My wife, the woman I thought loved me, saying she hated me. In that moment, everything I believed about our relationship shattered. I couldn't even process what I was hearing. It felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest, like the ground beneath me had disappeared. I wanted to hang up, but I couldn't. It was like I was frozen, forced to listen to the person I loved the most talk about me like I was nothing. Her friends joined in, laughing along with her. "Why don't you just leave him?" One of them said. "What's the point of staying with someone you can't stand?" And Lisa, my Lisa, laughed again and said, "Because it's convenient. I don't love him, but it's easier this way." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind was racing. How long had she felt this way? Had everything between us been a lie? Was she only with me because I was convenient? The woman I thought was my partner, my soulmate, she was a stranger to me now. I finally hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. My heart was pounding, and my mind was spinning. I sat there in silence, staring at the phone in my hand, replaying her words over and over in my head. "I hate him. He's pathetic." The words echoed in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't think straight. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just kept asking myself the same questions. How long had she felt this way? Why hadn't I seen the signs? Was it something I'd done? Or was this who she'd been all along? The next morning, I woke up with a sense of dread unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I couldn't look at her the same way. When she walked into the kitchen, smiling like nothing had happened, I felt sick to my stomach. How could she act so normal? How could she pretend everything was fine when she'd said those things about me just hours before? But I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I wanted answers, but I didn't know how to ask the questions. I was terrified of what she might say, of what else I might find out. So I did the only thing I could think of. I decided to investigate. If she was capable of saying those things behind my back, what else was she hiding? I started small. I waited until she went out, and I checked her phone. My hands were trembling as I unlocked it, half expecting to find nothing, half expecting to find something worse. And there it was, a group chat with her friends, the same friends she'd been with the night before. I scrolled through the messages, my heart sinking with every word. They were talking about me, about how boring I was, how annoying. Lisa had written things I never thought I'd see. "He doesn't even realize how stupid he looks when he tries to be romantic. Sometimes I wish he'd just disappear." The words blurred together as I kept scrolling, each one more painful than the last. It wasn't just her friends. Lisa was leading the conversation, tearing me apart piece by piece. It felt like I was reading a stranger's thoughts. The woman I loved wasn't just unhappy. She despised me. She mocked me, belittled me, and worst of all, she didn't even care if anyone else knew. She wasn't hiding it. She was proud of it. I put the phone down and sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. I kept asking myself, how could she do this? How could she say these things about me? Was this the woman I married? Or had I been blind to who she really was all along? I wanted to confront her. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make her explain herself. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to understand how deep this betrayal went. So I made a decision. I would find out everything. And once I knew the truth, I would decide what to do. What I didn't know then was that the truth would be worse than anything I could have imagined. And when I finally confronted her, it wouldn't just end with words. Before we continue, a quick reminder. 80% of our viewers haven't subscribed to the channel yet. If you're enjoying this story, please support us by clicking the subscribe button and turning on notifications. It helps us bring you more captivating stories like this. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. But before I could confront Lisa, I needed to be sure that what I'd heard and read wasn't just a one-off moment of frustration. Part of me still wanted to believe that there was some explanation, that there was some part of her that still cared. And yet, deep down, I knew there was more to this. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the tip of the iceberg. I started paying attention to the little things. Her tone when she spoke to me, her body language, the way she avoided eye contact when we were alone. It was subtle at first, but once I started looking for it, I couldn't unsee it. She wasn't just annoyed with me. She seemed genuinely disgusted. The way she sighed when I walked into the room, the way she rolled her eyes at the smallest things I said. It was like she couldn't stand to be near me. One night, when she was in the shower, I took her phone again. I didn't want to, but I had to know if there was more. And there it was, another message in the group chat. This time, one of her friends asked if she'd thought about leaving me. Lisa's reply made my stomach turn. Not yet. It's easier to stay for now. He pays for everything anyway. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Easier to stay? Pays for everything? Was that all I was to her? A paycheck? A safety net? I kept scrolling, my hands trembling as I read more. It wasn't just that she hated me. It was the way she talked about me, like I was some kind of joke. Like I wasn't even a person to her anymore. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came when I found a new conversation. One that wasn't with her friends. It was with a man named Chris. I didn't recognize the name, and at first, I thought it might just be a coworker or a casual acquaintance. But as I scrolled through their messages, it became clear that this was something else entirely. The messages were flirtatious, teasing, and intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. She was talking to him the way she used to talk to me when we first started dating. I felt a surge of anger and pain as I read their exchanges. She told him about her day, complained about me, and even joked about how clueless I was. He has no idea, she wrote. I could do whatever I want, and he'd never suspect a thing. My hands clenched into fists as I stared at the screen. How could she do this to me? How could she betray me like this and then come home and act like everything was fine? I felt a wave of rage building inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't confront her yet, not until I had all the evidence I needed. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own home. I checked her phone whenever I got the chance. I looked through her emails, her social media accounts, even her location history. I hated myself for snooping, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. The more I found, the worse it got. It wasn't just Chris. There were other messages, other men. Some were flirtatious, some were casual, but all of them pointed to the same thing. Lisa was living a double life. She wasn't just unhappy with me. She was actively looking for someone, to replace me. It was like I was peeling back layers of a lie I didn't even know existed. Every message, every interaction was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. But even as the evidence piled up, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I needed to be ready, and I needed a plan. I started documenting everything. I took screenshots of the messages, saved emails, and even started recording our conversations when I could. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it all, but I knew I needed proof. Proof of who she really was, proof of what she was doing behind my back. I wasn't going to let her twist the story or make me out to be the villain. Not this time. But the more I uncovered, the angrier I became. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything else. Every time I looked at her, I felt a surge of hatred and betrayal that was almost too much to bear. She would sit there, smiling, laughing, pretending like everything was fine, and all I could think about was the lies, the betrayal, the messages to Chris and the others. One night, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. She was out with her friends again, and I was sitting alone in the living room, staring at the evidence I'd collected. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. I knew that when she walked through that door, I was going to confront her. I didn't know what I was going to say or how she would react, but I couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. When she finally came home, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the screenshots spread out in front of me. She walked in, smiling, but the moment she saw the look on my face, her smile faded. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I didn't say anything at first. I just picked up the phone and handed it to her, showing her the messages with Chris. Her face went pale. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "Who is Chris? And why are you telling him all these things about me?" For a moment, she just stood there, frozen, her eyes darting between me and the phone. Then she started stammering, trying to come up with an excuse, but I wasn't having it. "Don't lie to me," I said. "I've seen everything. I know everything." Her excuses quickly turned to anger. She started shouting, accusing me of invading her privacy, of being controlling, of overreacting. But I didn't back down. I told her I'd seen the messages, the group chats, everything. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded. "How long have you been lying to me?" Her response shocked me. She didn't apologize, didn't show any remorse. Instead, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "What do you want me to say? You're not the man I thought you were. I haven't been happy in years." Her words cut through me like a knife. I felt a surge of rage building inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Her words were still hanging in the air, echoing in my head like a hammer pounding against my skull. "I haven't been happy in years." That's what she said. No apology, no remorse. Just those words, as if that somehow justified everything she'd done. As if that made it okay to mock me, to humiliate me, to betray me. I stared at her, my hands trembling with rage, and for a moment, I couldn't even speak. But then the dam broke. "You haven't been happy?" I shouted. "And what about me, Lisa? Do you think I've been happy? Do you think I've enjoyed being treated like a joke behind my back? You've been lying to me, humiliating me, and you think you're the victim here?" She didn't back down. She crossed her arms and glared at me like I was the one in the wrong. "I'm not going to apologize for being honest," she said. "At least I had the courage to say how I really feel. You're the one who's been living in denial, pretending everything's fine when it's not." Her words felt like gasoline on an open flame. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on me," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You're the one who's been lying. You're the one who's been talking to other men behind my back. You're the one who said you hate me." For a moment, she looked stunned, like she didn't know how to respond. But then she shrugged and said, "Maybe I do. Maybe I've hated you for a long time, Daniel. Did you ever think about that? Did you ever stop to think that maybe you're the problem?" Those words hit me harder than anything else she'd said. I stood there, staring at her, my mind racing, trying to process what she just said. Was this really how she felt? Had she really hated me all this time? And if so, why didn't she just leave? Why string me along? Why pretend to be happy when she clearly wasn't? I asked her that. "If you hate me so much, why didn't you just leave?" I said. "Why put me through all of this? Why pretend to love me when you clearly don't?" Her answer made my blood run cold. "Because it was easier," she said. "Because I didn't want to deal with the hassle of a divorce. Because, honestly, I didn't think you'd notice." She said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Like my feelings didn't even matter. That's when I realized something. Lisa didn't care about me. She never did. I was just a convenience to her, a safety net, someone to pay the bills and keep the house running while she lived her double life. And the worst part was, she didn't even feel guilty about it. She didn't even think she'd done anything wrong. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. I'd spent years trying to be the perfect husband, trying to make her happy, trying to be everything she needed. And this was how she repaid me. Well, if she thought she could walk all over me and get away with it, she had another thing coming. I took a deep breath and looked her straight in the eye. "You think you're so clever," I said. "You think you can lie to me, betray me, and just walk away like nothing happened. But you're wrong. You have no idea who you're dealing with." She laughed, like she didn't take me seriously. "What are you going to do, Daniel?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Cry about it? Write me a letter? Go ahead. Do whatever you want. I don't care anymore." That laugh, it was the last straw. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let her walk away without facing the consequences of what she'd done. If she thought she could destroy me and get away with it, she was wrong. Dead wrong. I didn't say anything else. I just walked away, leaving her standing there in the kitchen, still smirking like she'd won. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I went into my office, closed the door, and started going through the evidence I'd collected. The screenshots, the messages, the photos. I had everything I needed to expose her for who she really was. And I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to destroy her. I spent the next few days putting my plan into motion. I reached out to her friends, her family, even her coworkers. I sent them copies of the messages, the screenshots, the conversations with Chris. I wanted everyone to see the truth, to see what kind of person she really was. I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. Not this time. And then, when the time was right, I confronted her one last time. But this time, I wasn't just angry. I was prepared. I had the evidence, the witnesses, the proof. And I wasn't going to let her talk her way out of it. This time, there would be no excuses, no justifications, no lies. This time, she would have to face the truth. And when she did, she wouldn't just lose me. She would lose everything. I sat alone in my office that night, staring at the stack of evidence I'd collected. The screenshots, the messages, the proof of her lies. It was all there, laid out in black and white. It wasn't just about exposing her anymore. It was about taking back control. For years, I'd been the one bending over backward, trying to make her happy, trying to hold our marriage together. But not anymore. Now, it was her turn to feel what it was like to have everything ripped away. The first thing I did was close all of our joint accounts. I went to the bank early the next morning, withdrew every penny I could, and moved it into a private account under my name. It wasn't hard. After all, I'd been the one managing our finances from the beginning. She never cared about the details, never bothered to ask where the money came from or how much we had. She just assumed it would always be there. Well, not anymore. Next, I called my lawyer. I explained everything, what I'd found, what I'd overheard, what she'd done. He listened patiently, then asked me one simple question. "What do you want out of this?" I didn't even have to think about it. "I want her to lose everything," I said. "I want her to know what it feels like to have nothing." He nodded and started laying out a plan. Divorce papers, asset freezes, legal protections. I was going to make sure she couldn't take a single thing from me. But that wasn't enough. I didn't just want her to lose our marriage. I wanted her to lose the life she'd built on top of my trust and my hard work. I wanted her to feel the same humiliation, the same betrayal that she'd made me feel. So, I started making phone calls. Her friends, her family, her coworkers. I reached out to all of them, one by one, and shared the truth. I sent them copies of the messages, the screenshots, the photos. I wanted them to see her for who she really was. And judging by their responses, it didn't take long for the cracks to start showing. Her best friend, Lisa, was the first to call me back. "I had no idea she was doing this," Lisa said, her voice trembling. "She always acted like everything was fine, like you were this perfect husband." I could hear the disbelief in her voice, the betrayal. And she wasn't the only one. Over the next few days, I got calls from her parents, her siblings, even a couple of her coworkers. They were all shocked, all disgusted by what she'd done. And I made sure to let them know exactly how I felt. "She's been lying to all of us," I told them. "And I think it's time she faced the consequences." But the real turning point came when I sent the messages to Chris. I wasn't sure how he would react. I didn't know much about him, aside from what I'd seen in their conversations. But when he responded, it was clear that he had no idea what he was getting himself into. "I didn't know she was married," he said. "She told me you were separated." His tone was panicked, desperate. I could tell he was scared, and I didn't feel the slightest bit of sympathy. "You're welcome to her," I said. "But let me give you a piece of advice. If she'll lie to me, she'll lie to you too." He didn't say much after that, but I could tell he was rattled. And just like that, one by one, the people she'd relied on, the people she'd fooled, started pulling away. She was losing them, just like she was losing me. Then came the day of the confrontation. I waited until she came home from work, her usual fake smile plastered on her face. But this time, I didn't let her get away with it. I had the divorce papers ready, the evidence spread out on the table, and a list of everything she'd lose once she signed them. Her face went pale the moment she saw it all. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What are you doing?" I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just looked her in the eye and said, "I'm done, Lisa. I'm done being your fool, your safety net, your punching bag. You wanted to hate me? Fine. But now you're going to see what happens when I stop caring." She tried to argue, tried to defend herself, but I didn't let her. "Don't bother," I said, cutting her off. "I've heard enough. I've seen enough. And so has everyone else." I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized what I meant. "What did you do?" she demanded. I didn't answer. I just handed her the folder with all the evidence I'd sent to her friends, her family, her coworkers. "You've been exposed, Lisa," I said. "Everyone knows who you really are now." She broke down then, sobbing, begging me to reconsider. "I'll change," she said. "I'll do whatever you want. Just don't do this." But it was too late. I'd given her everything, and she'd thrown it all away. There was no going back. "You made your choice," I said. "Now you get to live with it." She signed the divorce papers that night. She didn't have a choice. I'd made sure of that. And when it was all over, when she finally left, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't happiness, exactly, but it was close. It was freedom. Freedom from her lies, her betrayal, her hatred. Freedom to start over, to rebuild my life without her dragging me down. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one last piece of the puzzle, one final step to make sure she couldn't hurt me, or anyone else, ever again. And that's when I came up with the idea for the final act of my revenge. Exposing her lies and forcing her to sign the divorce papers was only the beginning. It gave me some satisfaction, sure, but it didn't feel like enough. Not after everything she'd done. Not after the years of deception, the betrayal, the mockery. She had torn apart my life, shattered my trust, and humiliated me in ways I could never forget. And I wasn't going to let her walk away thinking she had won anything. If she thought she could just start over and leave me behind, she was wrong. This time, I would make sure the pain was unforgettable. I started planning meticulously, every detail carefully considered. This wasn't going to be some rash outburst of anger. It was going to be calculated, deliberate, and impossible for her to ignore. I knew Lisa better than anyone. Her habits, her routines, her weaknesses. And I was going to use all of it against her. The first step was psychological. Lisa prided herself on appearances, on how others saw her. To the outside world, she was the perfect wife, the social butterfly, the one who had it all together. But I knew the truth, and now, so did everyone else. I reached out to her workplace, anonymously of course, and provided them with proof of her infidelities. Her texts, her photos with Chris, her disdain for me. They were all laid out in black and white. I knew her job relied on trust and professionalism, and I also knew that once her boss saw the kind of person she really was, she wouldn't be able to recover. Within a week, she was called into a meeting with HR. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it through mutual contacts. The fallout was swift and brutal. She lost her job, her reputation tarnished beyond repair. And for Lisa, that was just the beginning. Next, I focused on her social circle. The friends who had laughed with her at my expense, who had encouraged her to treat me like a joke, they weren't going to be spared either. I had kept records of their conversations, screenshots of their mocking words, and I made sure they knew I had them. A few anonymous messages, a couple of well-timed emails, and their private lives started unraveling too. Secrets they thought were safe suddenly weren't, and the group that had once been so tight-knit began turning on each other. It was chaos, and Lisa was at the center of it. But the final blow was yet to come. I knew where Lisa had moved after the divorce. It wasn't far, just a small apartment on the other side of town. I also knew she'd been trying to rekindle things with Chris, the man she had been messaging. What she didn't know was that Chris had already reached out to me, panicked and full of regret, after I sent him the proof of her lies. He wanted nothing to do with her anymore, and he was more than willing to help me with the next step of my plan. Together, we devised a way to send her a message she couldn't ignore. Chris agreed to meet her under the guise of wanting to talk things through, but instead of a reconciliation, he confronted her with everything I had shared with him. He told her he didn't want to be her backup plan, that he wouldn't be another pawn in her games. And then, in the middle of their argument, I walked in. The look on her face when she saw me standing there, it was priceless. Shock, fear, anger. It was all there, plain as day. She tried to act indignant, tried to blame me for ambushing her, but I wasn't interested in her excuses. "You wanted to destroy me, Lisa," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Well, congratulations. You did. But now it's your turn." What happened next wasn't pretty. I didn't lay a hand on her, but I didn't need to. Words can cut deeper than fists ever could, and I used mine like a weapon. I told her everything. How I had exposed her to her friends, her family, her workplace. How I had destroyed her carefully crafted image piece by piece. How I had made sure everyone in her life knew the truth about who she really was. She tried to fight back, tried to deny it, but there was no point. The evidence was overwhelming, and she knew it. She screamed. She cried. She begged me to stop, but I didn't. I wanted her to feel the same helplessness, the same despair that she had made me feel. And for the first time, I saw it in her eyes. She was broken, and I felt nothing but satisfaction. But even that wasn't enough. Before I left, I made sure to leave her with one final message, one that she would never forget. I handed her a folder containing everything I had on her, every message, every photo, every piece of evidence. "This is your life now," I said. "You made your choices, and now you get to live with the consequences." And then I walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew she would never recover from this, that she would never be able to piece her life back together. And for the first time in months, I felt free. Free from her lies, her betrayal, her toxic presence in my life. She had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she had only destroyed herself. As I drove away that night, I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't a happy smile, not exactly. It was the smile of a man who had finally taken back control of his life, who had finally found a way to heal. Lisa had taken so much from me, but she hadn't taken everything. And now, I had the one thing she could never take away, my freedom. In the days that followed, I felt a strange sense of calm. For months, I had been consumed by anger, betrayal, and the overwhelming need to make her pay for what she'd done. But now that it was over, now that she had faced the consequences of her actions, I felt lighter. It was as if a weight I didn't even know I was carrying had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. But that calm didn't come without its moments of doubt. There were nights when I would sit alone in my apartment, staring at the empty spaces where her things used to be, wondering if I had gone too far. Had I become just as cruel as she was? Had I let my anger turn me into someone I didn't recognize? Those questions haunted me, but every time they did, I reminded myself of one simple truth. I didn't start this. She did, and she had every chance to make it right. Instead, she chose to burn it all down. I just gave her the matches. Life after Lisa wasn't easy, but it was better. I threw myself into my work, into rebuilding the parts of my life that she had tried to tear apart. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, people she had pushed away because they didn't fit into her version of our life. I started going to therapy, not because I thought I needed fixing, but because I wanted to understand how I had let things get so bad, how I had missed the signs, how I had let myself be fooled for so long. Therapy was hard, but it was also eye-opening. It forced me to confront parts of myself I hadn't wanted to face, to acknowledge the ways I had let my own insecurities blind me to the truth. But it also taught me something important. What happened with Lisa wasn't my fault. I didn't deserve what she did to me, and I wasn't going to let it define me. As the weeks turned into months, I started to see the pieces of my life falling back into place. The pain of what she had done began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination to move forward. I stopped checking her social media, stopped wondering what she was doing or who she was with. It didn't matter anymore. She was no longer a part of my life, and I was finally okay with that. But just when I thought I was done with her for good, she reached out. It was a text message, short and simple. "Can we talk?" At first, I ignored it. I didn't owe her anything, not after everything she had put me through. But the messages kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. "I need to explain. I made a mistake. Please, Daniel, just give me a chance to fix this." Part of me wanted to block her, to erase her from my life completely. But another part of me was curious. What could she possibly have to say? What excuse could she offer that would make up for what she had done? So, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. Not because I wanted closure, but because I wanted to hear her admit the truth. I wanted to hear her say, out loud, that she had been wrong. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, a place we used to go to when we were first dating. She looked different, tired, worn down, like the weight of everything had finally caught up with her. She tried to smile when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't respond. I just sat down and waited for her to speak. She started with an apology. "I know I hurt you," she said. "I know I messed up, and I know I can't fix what I did, but I needed to say I'm sorry." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that she was finally taking responsibility for her actions. But the other part of me couldn't forget the way she had looked at me that night, the way she had laughed in my face when I confronted her. And I couldn't help but wonder, was this apology for me, or was it just another attempt to make herself feel better? "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you saying this now, after everything?" She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously. "Because I lost everything," she said. "I lost my job, my friends, my family. And I know it's my fault, but I don't know how to fix it." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw real tears in her eyes. But instead of feeling sympathy, all I felt was anger. She wasn't sorry for what she had done to me. She was sorry for what it had cost her. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her, trying to find the words to say. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, "Lisa, I'm glad you're finally realizing the consequences of your actions. But I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm not here to fix your life. That's your job now. I've moved on, and you need to do the same." She started to protest, but I held up my hand to stop her. "No," I said. "You don't get to rewrite the story. You don't get to paint yourself as the victim. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. Just like I had to live with what you did to me." She didn't say anything after that. She just nodded, her eyes filling with tears, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I stood up, paid for my coffee, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. That was the last time I ever saw Lisa. Looking back now, I realized that meeting her was the closure I didn't know I needed. Not because of what she said, but because of what I didn't feel. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hatred. I didn't feel anything at all. And that's how I knew I had finally moved on. She was a part of my past, but she would never be a part of my future. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. Life isn't perfect, and I don't know if I'll ever fully heal from what happened. But I do know this: I'm stronger now, wiser, and I'll never let anyone treat me the way Lisa did again. She took so much from me, but in the end, she gave me something too. A lesson I'll never forget. And for that, I'm grateful. That's the story of how I rebuilt my life after betrayal. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty, but it taught me what it means to truly stand up for yourself. If you've ever been through something like this, Know that you're not alone, and that there's life on the other side of the pain. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Until next time, take care of yourself and your heart.